I want to acknowledge Senator Sanders, who's the chair of the committee. His staffer is over here, so we appreciate that. There'll be some of our Senate colleagues coming in at various points. And you'll notice a camera going around, and the cameras are recording this for, among other things, later dissemination. So the impact that you have will be beyond this room. It'll be that which is upon those who view it at a later point by different mediums. Here's Senator Budd. So, since the Hamas-led massacre against Israel last month, there's been a disturbing rise in anti-Semitic incidences directed at Jewish students on college campuses. This includes targeted harassment and violent attacks, and it's not only students that are perpetrating these incidences, it is also the teachers tasked with ensuring students' academic freedom. At Drexel University, someone set a Jewish student's dorm room door on fire. At Tulane, in my home state, love Tulane, someone physically attacked a Jewish student during a pro-Palestinian rally. At Georgia Tech, someone wrote "Free Palestine" in shaving cream below the Jewish fraternity's Alpha Epsilon Pi's posted Israeli flag. And at the University of Chicago, someone wrote the phrase "Zionist freak show off our campus" on the sidewalk in the middle of campus. Additionally, a professor and faculty advisor at the University of California, Davis, wrote a social media post appearing to call for Zionist journalists and their children to be murdered. Now, these are just a few, but we're hearing of more such incidences every day. The threats and violence against Jewish and Israeli students are despicable. This is a point of moral clarity. No student should be afraid to go to school. Today we'll hear from some of the brave Jewish students who have recently faced harassment and attacks firsthand. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to your statement. Under Title IV of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Biden administration has a responsibility to prohibit discrimination in programs or activities at institutions receiving federal funds. This is the lead committee tasked with overseeing the Department of Education. It is our responsibility to understand the true severity of this trend and to ensure the department holds these taxpayer-funded institutions accountable for properly handling these events and not condoning discrimination on their campus. We must also ensure that students are aware of their right to file claims with the Office of Civil Rights if they face discrimination at their institution. The administration recently announced it would expedite review of OCR claims on college campuses and direct the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security to assist local law enforcement. These are good initial steps, but they do not ensure colleges are responsibly handling these events and working to prevent them in the first place. Now, the outrage to these events should be unanimous. There are no grounds for a nuanced response when a student is harassed or attacked on their way to class just because of who they are. There is no justification. There is no sliding scale of tolerance for bigotry and racism. It is wrong. Full stop. Period. End of sentence. Frankly, there's no reason why we're not having a full committee hearing with both Republicans and Democrats present. It's my hope that what we learn from today's conversation will lead to further bipartisan oversight by this committee. I look forward to hearing from our panelists on how colleges, the Biden administration, and Congress can work to better protect Jewish students and ensure a safe learning environment for all. With that, let me do my introductions. And Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, thank you for joining us. First is Ms. Julia Steinberg, an undergraduate student at Stanford University. She interns at the Free Press, a good Substack, recently authored an article entitled "Why My Generation Hates Jews," a powerful first-hand account of her experience as a Jewish student. Next is Mr. Eli Schmidman, a second-year law student at Columbia University, a vocal advocate for Jewish students on his campus, raising concerns with the response from his university's administration, and he himself has been the target of anti-Semitism over the last month. Next is Professor Jonathan Sarna, is the director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies and professor of American Jewish History at Brandeis University, a highly regarded historian on American Judaism and the author of American Judaism, A History. the comprehensive 350-year history of Jews in America. And then next, Mr. Ken Marcus, the founder and chairman of the Louis D. Brandeis Center and former Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. The Brandeis Center is an independent, unaffiliated nonprofit established to advance the civil and human rights of Jewish people and promote justice for all. And lastly, Rabbi Yudi Steiner is the executive director of the Rur Chabad Center at George Washington University. This is where he works closely with Jewish students on campus and has so for more than 15 years. This is not a formal hearing, but we'll nonetheless have opening statements. Senator Romney, thank you for joining. I've asked the panelists to keep their opening statements to about 5 minutes, and then we'll move into open discussion. And just for my colleagues, I'll let you go first, so just as a heads up, assuming that you wish. With that, Ms. Steinberg.
Thank you so much for having me. I am a Jewish 21-year-old college junior from Los Angeles. A lot of people have expressed their shock about what's happened on college campuses in the last month, with students cheering the slogans of a genocidal death cult, professors celebrating Hamas's massacre, and, in certain instances, Jewish students being physically threatened and assaulted. But I wasn't shocked, and I want to tell you why. In high school, my homeroom had an exercise where we made a chart dividing various ethnicities, religions, and other identities into the categories of oppressor on the left side and oppressed on the right. Women are oppressed. Straight people are oppressors. Then we reached the Jew category. This being a high school in Los Angeles, many of my classmates were Jewish. I recall we skipped it all together, but the chart of oppression stayed on the whiteboard. And I'm sure that if there were fewer Jews in that classroom, Jews would be put squarely in the oppressor category. Social justice theory became part of everything. My senior English class was not about great literature, but about readings and critical theory, which meant looking at ways to divide people by race, gender, and other characteristics. I had a non-academic weekly homeroom class in which we learned that white people are racist and men are toxic. In answer to the question, what is the most significant challenge that society faces today, on a college application, I wrote that it was identity politics. The teacher at my high school in charge of reviewing our applications scolded me, telling me that meant I was rejecting the advances of the civil rights movement. I changed it. In California, ethnic studies will be mandated at all public high schools by 2025. The curriculum that was first released was overtly anti-Israel and anti-Semitic. Sample lessons included the suggestion that Jews control the media and that Israel is an apartheid state. Jewish organizations had to organize to get this changed, but the final draft still carries the flattening of all people into the categories of oppressor and oppressed. It shouldn't be shocking that a generation that has been trained to identify and slot people based on their identities alone, and who are taught that violence against oppressors can be a righteous healing force, and yes, we are taught that, take to the streets to shout these lessons. When you see young people tearing down posters of kidnapped children, this is why. They've been taught that those children are instruments of an oppressive group. I go to Stanford, and I want to tell you what it's been like both before and after October 7th. For my freshman and sophomore years, I lived in a dorm with the only kosher dining hall on campus. Last winter, a Jewish student in my dorm found that a portrait of Hitler had been drawn on his door. They never found the perpetrator. Soon after, swastikas were carved into bathrooms in the main quad. In a great books class I took my freshman year, we had a week-long unit on the Holocaust. That week, a student gave a presentation on how Zionism is a new Nazism and how Israelis are the new Nazis. The day of October 7th, Stanford students hung banners celebrating the massacre. On October 8th, before the IDF had even responded, new banners were strung up around campus, saying, "The illusion of Israel is burning," and "by any means necessary." Some of my classmates, people I live with and learn with, believe that the worst forms of barbarism are justified if they are against Jews. My fellow students posted on their Instagram stories, "Settlers are not civilians," and, quote, "Every martyr that fought today and in every moment against the occupation is so deep in my heart." A Jewish girl in my hall told me that her roommate hasn't talked with her since the attacks. In the week since then, at Stanford, an instructor in a mandatory class called Civil, Liberal, and Global Education asked the Jewish and Israeli students to identify themselves and then stand in a corner. He said, "This is what Israel does to the Palestinians." I went to a pro-Palestine rally at Stanford because I wanted to hear what was said. Students were chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." This is a genocidal slogan of Hamas, and it is calling for the elimination of Israel, which is between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. I asked a fellow student what she meant when she chanted this. After admitting she wasn't knowledgeable about the issue, She said that it meant Palestine must be free from the Tigris River, which is in Iraq, to the Black Sea, north of Turkey. The student, though she knew virtually nothing about the geography or history of this region, had been taught enough to want to chant for the destruction of the world's only Jewish nation. All of this explains a poll released on October 23rd that found 64% of 18 to 24-year-olds think what happened on October 7th was a terrorist attack. 77% of us think it's true that Hamas terrorists killed 1,400 Israeli civilians, including entire families, and beheaded people. But when asked, in this conflict, do you side more with Israel or Hamas, 48% said Hamas. I'm 21 years old and Jewish. Apparently, 48% of my peers want people like me dead. It does not have to be like this. Reforms are possible and necessary. Lots of students say that the DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, bureaucracy can adapt to protect Jews too. But the answer is not for Jews to try and fit into the DEI caste system, to beg for a higher rank in the new ladder of victimhood. That is a losing strategy, not just for Jewish dignity, but for the values we hold as Jews and Americans. What can we do? Return to American values. We are not being properly educated if our schools seek to pit groups of students against each other. We need education that teaches about the world and all of its historical complexity, not indoctrination and slogans that say everybody is a part of a group that is either all good or all bad. We need an education system that values knowledge, not that teaches millions of children to parrot propaganda lines. You may think that I'm exaggerating. I invite you all to come visit me at Stanford. Come with me to my classes. Sit next to me in the dining hall. Go to the protests and the teach-ins. You will see that, if anything, I am understating the situation. My Jewish parents raised me to know what is right and what is wrong. We honor and believe in the rule of law, free speech, and the belief that everyone is equal because we are all created in the image of God. Those aren't just Jewish values. They are American values. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir?
Thank you, Senator Cassidy, for having me here today. My name is Eli Schmidman, and I'm a second-year law student at Columbia Law School. I first just want to say that the Columbia Jewish community really appreciates the attention to this serious matter, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak about events that have transpired over the past few weeks. On October 7th, Hamas launched a horrific attack against innocent Israeli civilians, murdering over 1,400 and kidnapping and raping children, women, and the elderly. On October 9th, in the immediate aftermath of the attack, while my Jewish brothers and sisters and I were still reeling from our loss, still burying our dead and frantically searching for our loved ones, over 20 student groups at Columbia University signed a joint statement titled "Oppression Breeds Resistance." In this statement, the students referred to Hamas as, quote, Palestinian fighters, and stated that Israel is solely responsible for any lives lost. They justified the terrorist attack on account of what they called Israel's apartheid system. No mention of Hamas or hint of condemnation, only justification for the brutal and horrific terrorist attack perpetrated against our brothers and sisters in Israel. And so the anti-Semitic rhetoric began. Following the student statement, I expected the administration would come out and send a clear moral message, but that did not happen. The Columbia University administration released messages that simply expressed they were, quote, devastated by the horrific attack on Israel, and that, quote, the violence that erupted in Israel and Gaza this past weekend is nothing short of tragic. There was no mention of Hamas and no condemnation of the horrific terrorist attack. The administration's statements were also silent with regard to the oppression breeds resistance message. Following the messages released on October 9th, anti-Semitic incidents began to unfold and increased over the ensuing weeks. Anti-Semitism ran rampant. An Israeli undergraduate student was physically assaulted. At rallies, students chant, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," a slogan that is well understood to be a call for the destruction of Israel and the removal of Israeli citizens. At rallies, students hold signs, "Resistance is not terrorism." A Columbia University professor called the horrific terrorist attack, quote, awesome. A swastika was drawn in a Columbia building. Law school student leaders have stated publicly that they believe the Nova Festival massacre was a hoax and that the murder of babies is a proper form of resistance. On an anonymous student chat board, in reference to the recent horrific death of an elderly Jewish man in LA who was targeted for his support of Israel, a student said the elderly man must have done something to deserve it and, quote, if you throw the ball at someone, it's bound to be thrown at you. I myself experienced overt anti-Semitism when I was sitting in the law school building and a student openly and out loud said, quote, F the Jews. These are just a few of the anti-Semitic incidents that occurred over the last month at Columbia and just a sampling of what has been occurring at college campuses across the country. Jewish students have shared with me that they are afraid for their physical safety. They are afraid to walk alone on campus, Jewish students feel excluded from student organizations that have justified the horrific terrorist attack against their brothers and sisters. Myself and many other Jewish students at Columbia no longer feel welcome because now we know that we are hated simply for being Jews. The anti-Semitic rhetoric was not only expressed by students, it was endorsed by faculty as well. Over 100 Columbia University faculty signed a letter defending the oppression breeds resistance statement and referred to the horrific terrorist attack as a, quote, military response that is just one salvo in an ongoing war. This is the anti-Semitic rhetoric that has spread throughout Columbia. I want to be clear. My colleagues and I are not and have not been advocating for the university to restrict student speech. What we have advocated for and requested from Columbia is for them to use their speech. An individual's right to free speech does not mean they have a right to not be criticized. At Columbia, students glorified and contextualized a horrific terrorist attack and then continued to spread anti-Semitic rhetoric. This created a hostile environment for Jewish students. I suspect this would not be tolerated for other social issues. And so Columbia must ensure that equal protection is provided for all, that anti-Semitism, like all other forms of hate, is not tolerated, and that hate speech is not enabled to spread so far as to create a hostile and unsafe environment for students. In fact, Columbia has shown this is possible, only quite late. On October 31st, Columbia administration released a message that clearly condemned Hamas's attack and stated unequivocally that, quote, there is no place for hate at Columbia Law School. The message also stated, quote, although permissible protected speech is extremely broad, standing for free speech does not mean we must endorse or condone all views lawfully expressed. This is what Columbia must be doing going forward. Clearly say they do not condone or endorse hateful speech and that it has no place at Columbia and other universities. On November 1st, Columbia has also announced the creation of an anti-Semitism task force to increase inclusion and support for Jewish students. In this announcement, the university also stressed that they are, quote, moving forcefully against anti-Semitic threats. We have yet to see this, and I believe this is of vital importance. Columbia must ensure they respond quickly to anti-Semitic violations and that anti-Semitic incidents result in appropriate consequences. This process should also be as transparent as the law allows so that students are assured the university is keeping them safe and that the university may be held accountable. These recent steps taken by the administration are just the beginning. Columbia still has much work to do. But if Columbia were to continue to take actual steps and ensure that hate speech is not enabled to create a hostile and unsafe environment, that all students are protected equally, and that conduct violations are handled swiftly, appropriately, and transparently, I do believe Columbia can become a safe and respectful environment for all its students. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to note that we've been joined by our Democratic colleagues, Senator Kaine and Baldwin, and by Republican colleagues who have not yet mentioned, Senator Collins, Marshall, and Tuberville. So there's bipartisan concern on this, and again, I just want to recognize that. Professor, we don't have normally we have a clock, and we do want you to limit to 5 minutes, so I'm just going to use low tech and use my phone, okay? So.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator, for inviting me. 23 years ago, at the turn of the millennium, nobody would have imagined that we would be here talking about campus anti-Semitism. A scholarly volume actually appeared in the year 2000 entitled The Death of American Anti-Semitism. It didn't exist anymore. Many Americans, Jews included, imagined that anti-Semitism was becoming just a historical subject in this country, like the Protestant-Catholic battles of yesteryear. Now, there is a long and ugly history of overt anti-Semitism on many college campuses. Admissions quotas that limited the number of Jewish students, the exclusion of Jews from many departmental faculties, bans against Jewish membership in many college fraternities and clubs, and even during the 1930s and 40s, occasional violence organized by the so-called social justice warriors of the infamous radio priest, Father Charles Coughlin, now known to have been in the pay of the Nazis. But we thought that history was all in the past, and today we know better. Reports of anti-Semitism, often in the guise of anti-Zionism, have been accelerating on college campuses now for more than a decade. Zionists have been barred from some progressive campus clubs. Faculty have refused to recommend students for study abroad programs in Israel. Students have recounted feelings of being intimidated by some of their instructors. Graduate students with Jewish names report being asked questions about their ties to Israel when they apply for academic jobs. And Tablet magazine reported this past April that the number of Jews on major Ivy League campuses has been cut in half or more over the past decade by new elite doctrines that downplay merit in favor of amorphous definitions of diversity and privilege, unquote. Nothing, nevertheless, prepared us for the anti-Semitic onslaught that followed the horrific events of October 7th. Now, let's be clear. Each college and university is a story unto itself, and in these matters, I remember my Congressman Thomas P. O'Neill used to say that all politics is local, and in a way, these stories are local. But I think we can group universities and colleges under three major headings. First, over 100 college presidents, I'm proud to say mine at Brandeis was among them, signed on to a statement published in the Wall Street Journal that declared, "We stand together with Israel against Hamas." And no surprise, Jews on those colleges feel protected. There may be incidents, but they know that administrators have their back. A second group, many colleges, lesser-known ones, have kept silent. Some never issue political statements. At a typical college of this type, a high-ranking faculty member explained to me that her students are just not deeply engaged with world events between holding down jobs and studying for classes. They don't find time to keep up with the news. And students there, likewise, feel mostly safe. But on too many universities, we've heard from some just now, including many of our best-known Ivy League ones, presidents failed to provide strong leadership. Administrators stood idly by as faculty members recontextualized their word, Hamas barbarism, so as to blame the victims. Or they defended terrorist atrocities outright as an uprising of the oppressed. Groups of students, often led by the pro-terrorist Hamas-supporting Students for Justice in Palestine, then harassed and intimidated their Jewish classmates, creating a climate of extreme loneliness and palpable fear. Sure. One could go on multiplying these examples. Now, I want to agree that robust debate conducted civilly should be celebrated and modeled, but freedom of speech does not include the freedom to harass and intimidate. It certainly doesn't include the freedom to threaten individuals and groups with violence and death. I think America has done much to assure now that no worker today needs to labor in an environment that a reasonable person would consider intimidating, hostile, or abusive. Surely that same protection should now be extended to Jewish students and faculty members on American college campuses. Thank you, Senator.
He is the former Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education, and so will have some particular insights. Mr. Marcus?
Thank you, Ranking Member Cassidy, Senators. I chair the Louis D. Brandeis Center for Human Rights Under Law. I'm honored to appear before you on an occasion when you will not vote on me afterwards. It is good to return. Since I follow a distinguished professor at Brandeis University and I'm at Brandeis Center, I need you to understand that not all Jewish organizations are named after Justice Louis D. Brandeis, but some of the best of them are. Professor Sarna has described the history from a scholarly perspective, so I'm just going to say a couple words about a portion of that history from my perspective as a practitioner, which is to say that at the turn of this century, he said that there has been an increasing problem for over 10 years, and I would say 20 years ago, I began work in this area because it appeared that there were some campuses, hotspot campuses in the United States, especially on the West Coast and some in the Northeast, that were experiencing situations that seemed to be worse than what I'd seen before. That after half a century of progress post-World War II, we were no longer really able to say we're still making progress. The situation wasn't dire at that time. People would ask me why I was in it, and I would say not because of the incidents we're seeing today, but because of the fear that things may get worse. People no longer ask me why I'm in this field because people now are starting to see what it means for things to get worse. Over the last 20 years, the situation has gotten worse, not steadily, but certainly consistently, and I would say that the rate of increase has expanded or accelerated. I would also say that the situation has been worse during those years when Israel has been on the news. But the good years, when it's not in the news and when the rates are not as high, the good years are worse each time than the prior good year, and the bad years are worse than the bad years before. Now what we're seeing is something that I think that everyone should be able to understand is not just bad but horrifying, not only for what it foretells, but for what it is. When we have a situation in which we know, and we see on our televisions, we see in our newspapers, that there has been a mass assault in which civilians have been mass slaughtered, there's been widespread rape, there's been torture, desecrated corpses, and there is suddenly on campuses around the country an outbreak of support for the murder, the rape, the torture. I think we have to understand that what we have here is a wake-up moment. It's not just an issue about whether someone said something bad that should be punished. When you have this kind of a nationwide social phenomenon, you have to ask, my God, how did we get to this? What have we done to turn our great universities into institutions at which people are coming out supporting terrorist organizations and their slaughter? Very, very significant problem. Not all of it can be handled by the federal government, but some of it can be. On October 6th, if we had a hearing here, I would have said the situation has never been worse. During the Trump administration, people observed that we were at record highs, but they're higher during this administration. And they've got continually worse over periods leading up to October 6th, when all of the surveys and data, as well as our anecdotal experience at the Brandeis Center, showed that we were getting far more incidents of complaints, and they were already different. We had had a period when we saw students coming to us, first at hotspot campuses, then all over this country, telling us about environments that had become toxic as a result of anti-Israel extremist speech. That was a period of time. Then we moved into a phase in which we were hearing that first Jewish institutions, like Jewish clubs, were being excluded from membership in other parts of the campus, especially within progressive space, and then Jewish students individually. In other words, we moved from a period of extreme anti-Israel rhetoric to a period of exclusion of Jewish students, targeted exclusion, Jewish students, including some of our clients, being told they couldn't serve in student government positions, being expelled from student clubs, being thrown out of, I'm going to say it, forgive me, sexual assault survivor groups, having previously been assaulted, then being told because they're Zionists they couldn't belong, book clubs, so on and so forth. So we moved from toxic environments to targeting and exclusion of Jews, especially those Jews for whom Zionism is an integral part of their identity, as it is for a majority of Jewish Americans. But now, Now we're seeing something that may be worse, which is to say we are seeing a genocidal ideology abroad, which is not being celebrated alone, but also being echoed and amplified from within our college campuses. Very significant moment. Now, not all of this can be addressed by the federal government, but some of it can. Let me give you a few examples. OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, which I formerly managed. There has been significant public policy advances during the last few administrations. During the George W. Bush administration, we established the policy that indicates for the first time that Jews are covered under Title VI because of ethnic and ancestral background. During the Biden administration, this was expanded upon. During 2010 clarification by the Justice and Education Departments. During the Trump administration, this was further expanded. We're not seeing a further expansion by the Biden administration, despite various promises that we would see a regulation. I know my time has been up. I'll be happy to expand on this later if there are questions.
And a point of clarification, you said after the W administration, then you said the Biden administration, then you later said, no, the Biden administration is not. I think you meant the Obama administration.
That's correct. Thank you,
Gotcha.
Senator Cassidy.
It's rare that I get to correct an attorney, so I'm pleased about that day. And Rabbi, some came late, so let me just kind of briefly reintroduce Rabbi. He is the executive director of the Roher Chabad at George Washington University. So, Rabbi.
Thank you all for hosting this important conversation. I want to bless you to have the wisdom and the courage to lead our nation in these trying times. My name is Rabbi Yudi Steiner. My wife Rifki and I run the Roher Chabad Center at GW, a Jewish student organization at the George Washington University. We've been serving the Jewish students and the community more broadly at GW for more than 15 years. We're in regular communication with hundreds of Jewish students. We know their lives intimately, their successes, and their struggles. A few days after the October 7th attack, I was having a discussion with a group of Jewish students when one of them shared the following story. There was a vigil the night before to pray for the 1,400 slain Israelis and the hundreds of hostages. This particular student is in a large sorority, so she sent a message in the sorority group chat saying that they should all meet to walk over together to the vigil. She named a location and time to meet. The appointed time came and went. No one showed up, she said, and she burst out into tears. Not one of her 100 sisters showed up to be with her and support her at the vigil, praying for her massacred fellow Jews. The feeling of being isolated and alone is pervasive amongst the Jewish students on campus today. Jewish students are truly feeling unheard and scared in ways and at levels I've never seen before. Why are Jewish students on campus feeling so alone? Because every Jew knows, deep down, that Hamas would kill every one of us if only they could. And for the first time in their lives, students wonder, would my friends really just stand by and watch Hamas do it to me as they are standing by right now? One really does wonder how these same college students would have reacted to the horrors of the Holocaust. But why is it so hard for college students to see the utter cruelty of Hamas attacks and stand in solidarity and support with their Jewish friends scared and shaken to the core? There's no question that they take their cues from the university professors and administrators. For years, anti-Israel rhetoric at GW was often vicious and hateful. However, the university and many Jews, including myself, used to say, listen, that's their opinion on Israel. I vehemently disagree, but it's political disagreement and they're entitled to their opinion. Then came October 7th. The whole world was shocked by the barbarity. We cried, we mourned for days in ways we hadn't ever before in our lives. And we were sure that this time, finally, the world would see Hamas for what we always knew it to be, a brutal terror organization with no interest in a country of their own, just the destruction of the one Jewish country. This was clearly no longer political, right? A few days after the attack, while Israel was still actively fighting terrorists inside Israel, while dead babies were still being found on the kibbutzim, someone sent me a picture. It was a poster affixed to the clock in the center of the campus square. The sign read, "Glory to our martyrs." There was a shrine of candles and decorations around it. I froze. Here at GW, were they really openly supporting Hamas right in the middle of our campus? My mind flashed back to September the 11th, 2001. The entire country was shocked, scared, glued to the televisions. At some point, the news cameras showed Gaza, where people were giving out candies and celebrating. The world was in an uproar. How can they celebrate the murder of innocent civilians? But on 9/11, those appalling celebrations were in a third world Middle Eastern country. Now it's here in America, including at our campus. I was sure there would be an overwhelming response from GW's administration. Sadly, it seems that when the victims are Jews, the world isn't as incensed. They will condemn it, but just enough to look good. There's no anger at the glorification of anti-Jewish hate, just polite condemnation. And so I finally joined the camp that says, this is discrimination against Jews. This is anti-Semitism. If students at GW had projected anti-African American slogans on the wall of GW's main library, the school would be shaking to its foundations, as it should. The students would be expelled. The president of the university would beg forgiveness, as she should. But when days after the greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, students projected, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, a clear call to the genocide of 6 million Jews, there was nothing more than formal objection. When it's anti-Semitic, it's a word salad written by general counsel. This is textbook discrimination and unconscious bias. So I think universities need help with defining anti-Semitism. With other minority groups, they seem to be able to quickly and unequivocally call out racism and hate. But with the Jewish community, especially when it comes to Israel, they err on the side of, it's really not nice, but it's their right to protest the state of Israel. One of the keys of effective leadership is to have mentors who can guide us, especially in tough times. My mentor is Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. In 1978, Congress established Education and Sharing Day in honor of the Rebbe's contribution to education in America, and every year since, Education and Sharing Day is proclaimed by the President to coincide with the Rebbe's Hebrew birthday. I say this by way of introduction of the Rebbe's crucial teachings on the nature of education. The Rebbe taught us that education must first and foremost be about teaching morality. If we cannot impart morality, what good is all the knowledge and skills of an advanced degree? A university must be a place to teach right from wrong. Administrations, professors, and staff can't shirk this responsibility, even as it becomes complex, as we walk the delicate line of free speech. What more can universities do in response to these events? It's not enough to speak in general terms. We condemn hate, terrorism, etc. You see, evil thrives in between the lines of these ambiguous statements. We need to be able to take the moral, courageous, and clear stance and call out specifically the evil statements and those who make them by name, or we're actually giving them cover. Final point. In closing, I do believe that universities have lost their moral compass when it comes to anti-Semitism, and there must be an awakening and a reckoning before it's too late. Universities need to be encouraged to teach morality as the Rebbe taught. Administrators and professors should be taught to see the teachings of right and wrong as their primary job, and not shy away from controversy, or worse, teach false moral equivalences. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. For my colleagues, one, thank you, Senators Hassan and Hickenlooper, for joining us. We'll proceed as we normally do, although this is not a formal committee hearing, with the exception, Senator Budd showed up very first, so I'll let him go first. And then we'll go back and forth on order of appearance. So, Senator Budd, thanks for being prompt.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy, and I'll speak as long as my voice will allow. So thank you for having this hearing, or this roundtable. Just over a month ago, Hamas terrorists committed the deadliest massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust, and the worst foreign terror attack on Americans since 9/11. The level of barbarism that we witnessed was nothing short of evil. Compounding these atrocities is a reaction in some parts of the world and in our own land, like sickening anti-Semitic protest on university campuses. These vile demonstrations celebrated, justified, and endorsed this violence. Unfortunately, we even saw this in my state on the campus of UNC Chapel Hill. Less than 1 week after the attack, a pro-Palestinian group used a photo of paragliders to advertise a protest. To be clear, Hamas terrorists used paragliders to attack innocent young people at a music festival and then hunted them down and murdered them on the side of the road. That was endorsed on a college campus. At the rally, a pro-Palestinian speaker called the Hamas terrorists freedom fighters. He went on to say that the whole slaughter of over 1,400 men, women, and children and babies must be, quote, understood in a broader context. The entire display that occurred was disgusting and it should be roundly condemned. Even worse, we've seen threats of violence at Ivy League universities like Cornell, where a student threatened to kill Jewish students at a kosher dining hall on campus. Simply put, there could be no place in our country for that sort of anti-Semitic bigotry. According to the Anti-Defamation League, since the Hamas attacks this month, anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. have increased by 388%, and that's deeply troubling. Dr. Sarna, again, thank you and all your friends here and your colleagues for coming. Does that statistic track with what you've seen reported? If you turn your microphone on, yeah, thank you.
Yes, the statistic does track with what we're hearing and what students who talk to fellow students at campuses hear as well. And it's precisely the rapid rise that everyone is seeing. Hillel statistics are not identical with the ADL statistics, but both have seen what may well be an unprecedentedly rapid rise in anti-Semitic activities, violence, incidents on college campuses.
Thank you very much. Since the attacks on October 7th, the OCR, the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education, has yet to notify the members of this committee of what they're doing to protect Jewish students on college campuses. Mr. Marcus, based on your prior experience leading the department's Civil Rights Division, do you think or do you believe that the current office has done its job in protecting the rights and safety of Jewish students across the country in the wake of the vile anti-Semitism we have seen on campuses over the last month?
Thank you, Senator Budd. So let me try to give you the most candid but also balanced perspective that I can. This administration has done some good things towards protecting Jewish students. The first national strategy on anti-Semitism came out this year. That was a helpful use of what I would call political rhetoric. The Department of Education, pursuant to that strategy, has had some listening tours and raised some awareness in some circles about this issue. Senior members of the department, including not just the Assistant Secretary, Catherine Lehman, but also Deputy Secretary Martin and Secretary Cordona, have engaged in a way that I think is useful and helpful. And I think much of what Catherine Lehman is saying and doing is commendable. I was pleased to see a favorable resolution of the University of Vermont case, which the Brandeis Center had brought, a very important case, and a good resolution. However, that's the only resolution that we've seen of the many campus cases that are pending before, and the average age of these cases continues to go up. Nor have we seen significant policy guidance of any sort coming from the agency, despite continuing promises that they will do so. So I would say that there have been some good words, but there have not been the actions that I would like to see.
What are they missing, and how would you suggest they do it differently?
A few things. Some of you have written, I think, a good letter. So let me give you just a few. Number one, tomorrow they could begin self-directed investigations on those campuses where they have significant information about violations. They are aware, if they're reading any newspapers at all, that there are problems at some campuses, including violations of statutes that they're sworn to uphold. Number two, they could bring significantly more attention to this issue by bundling a bunch into a national compliance review. They've got 15, 17, 19,000 complaints. They could do 15, 19 individual cases. That would not be a blip, but it would raise a lot of attention and concern. Three, they have announced through OIRA's Unified Agenda and Regulatory Plan of the United States that they would issue a regulation, I'm asked to wrap it up, issue a regulation that codifies Executive Order 13899 on combating anti-Semitism. I would like to see them do that.
Thank you. So I'll close with this. We must not only stand shoulder to shoulder with Israel as they destroy Hamas terrorists, we must raise our voices to unequivocally condemn anti-Semitic hatred in all of its forms. Thank you all for being here.
Senator Budd, great questions. Thank you, sir. Senator Kane.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy, and thank you to the witnesses. I think Virginia was the home of the most shocking incident of anti-Semitism on any college campus in the last decade. It was Friday night, August 11, 2017. A Unite the Right rally had been called ostensibly to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee from a city park. And white nationalists, neo-Nazis, neo-Confederates gathered from around the country. And even though the protest was supposedly about Robert E. Lee, they began parading by the synagogue in Charlottesville in the Hillel Center. It was a Friday night. It was the move-in weekend for first-year students. And so many Jewish students had come to campus and were there at the Hillel Center or synagogue for Friday night services. My friend Jake Rubin, who's the campus Hillel rabbi at UVA, has described in significant detail what happened that night as people with torches marched by chanting, not "We love Robert E. Lee," but "Blood and soil, Jews will not replace us." Statements from Nazi rallies in the 1930s, these students were terrorized. They were terrorized. The next day, the protests spiraled into violence. A beautiful young woman, Heather Heyer, was run over by a white nationalist and killed. The students are still carrying scar tissue from that day. And so this is a very, very tragic topic. I will say I'm a little bit sad about the way just the setup of the discussion, because I'm hearing about the 400% increase in anti-Semitism since October 7 on my campuses. I talked to Rabbi Rubin about it the other day, but I'm also hearing from students who are Arab American or Muslim American or Palestinian American, or who express, any support for Palestinians, that they're being targeted too. And it's a little bit different. They may have their face put up on a poster because of something they said. They may have a job offer withdrawn because of something they said, but they're afraid. They're afraid for their safety. They're afraid for their livelihood, and we're not including them in this discussion. My sense is we probably won't have a discussion and hear from them. No one should be afraid on a college campus because of how they worship, because of where their family comes from, because of the accent they have. No one should be afraid. And because college campuses are filled with young people may say some kind of dumb stuff sometimes. Ms. Steinberg, you gave a great example of educating a fellow student who had chanted "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free," and you asked the student what that meant, because it's a statement that has long connection with an annihilationist goal, and yet the student that you asked said she thought the river was the Tigris and she had no idea what. And I'm assuming because of that and the way you educated her, you concluded she was not an annihilationist. I ask people who make that statement. I had someone in my office the other day who said, "What do you mean by that?" And the individual said, "What I mean is between," at least they got the river right, "between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, Palestinians and all should be free. Equal rights, equal access to water, equal access to education, all should be free." It's a sentiment or statement that has a history, but the sentiment as described was not an annihilationist sentiment. So I think we need to think about the role of college campuses in being robust areas of debate and dialogue. We need to be careful in labeling somebody an anti-Semite. We need to be careful in labeling somebody a terrorist or a terrorist sympathizer. It's sad when Jewish students are conflated with people's criticisms of Israeli politics. It's horrible. You can be anti-Congress and still be a patriot. In fact, you probably ought to be anti-Congress if you want to be. And it's sad when Jewish students feel the burden that because people are mad at Israel about something, they're going to be targeted. Similarly, it's sad when students, because of an Arab American or a Muslim background, are kind of conflated with terrorists. So how do we do this in a robust First Amendment society? Is challenging. I do think, Professor Sarna, you've given us a couple of good ideas. If there's a toxic workplace concept in the workplace, could you figure an equivalent among an educational institution? Good question. If there are universities that are doing it right, maybe the best practices can be implemented into places who are not doing it right. So I think you've given us some ideas about how to tackle this, but I'm happy that we're doing this today, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Kaine. And by the way, if we want to have a full committee hearing, an official committee hearing, and have kind of a different breath, I welcome that. So just to say that, okay? There's no attempt to kind of create only a hometown team here. But on the other hand, I think what we're hearing today is incredibly compelling. So, Senator Romney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your bringing this roundtable together. I wish our chairman had seen fit to call a hearing, but he decided not to do so. But I think it's an extraordinarily important topic, and I appreciate the testimony that's been given. I can tell you that as I've watched the news and as I've heard your testimony today, it makes me heartsick as I see anti-Semitism expressed in this country. It is disgusting. It's reprehensible. It is a violation of the mores and the feelings of being an American, and I'm just sick by it. I can tell you that my heart goes out to you as you've experienced these types of attacks yourself, and to the members of the Jewish American community that have felt the same thing. I'd also note, for those that are concerned about this dimension, which is less important than the one I've just described, but that is that this anti-Semitism being perpetrated in our country has geopolitical implications, in that democracy and freedom is at war with authoritarianism. And China and Russia, Iran, North Korea, and others have linked to push against freedom. The leader of the free world is the United States of America. Anything they can do to weaken the United States of America promotes their war against freedom and democracy. We are a diverse nation. Like it or not, we have people from all different ethnicities, countries of origin, religions, and so forth. And so if they can divide us, if they can make us hate one group or another, if they can make us less united, they advance their cause. So this has not only personal reprehensible implications, it has geopolitical implications that are threatening the very foundations of freedom. There are so many reasons for American college campuses and leaders of all kinds to step up and to oppose anti-Semitism in all of its manifestations. Now, Ms. Steinberg, I'm interested in what Stanford's response was. I should just note that I went to high school in a religiously diverse community. I didn't know who was of one religion or one ethnicity or another. As I got older, I began to recognize some people were Jewish and some were not. My personal interactions with Jewish individuals and reading of history suggests that, at least based on my experience, Jewish people have made enormous contributions to the United States of America, disproportionate in many, many ways. And so I find this incomprehensible. I find the anti-Semitism something I simply can't understand what its roots are, other than perhaps a sense of inferiority in the part of some people. But that being said, I'm interested in what the response has been at Stanford. I spent 1 year at Stanford, and the idea that the administration or the faculty would countenance the kind of outrage that you've experienced is hard for me to understand. What has been the response so far?
Thank you so much, Senator Romney, for answering that question. I can't give a bird's eye view of campus, but I can tell you where I was on October 7th. I did not leave my dorm room. After seeing pictures of the banners that were plastered all over campus, I wasn't scared, but I knew the sort of emotional weight that I would have to carry. My friends, I'm very lucky to have amazing friends, brought me Cliff Bars and coffee because they knew that it would be difficult for me to leave my room. And I'm not saying this because I want you or anyone in this room to further the idea that safetyism can protect Jews. It can't, and that's not the answer. The answer is moral clarity, which is not what the university provided. Less than 24 hours after the start of the war in Ukraine, the university issued a statement condemning the war. I believe in a similar time frame after the Dobbs decision was passed, the university issued a statement. Though the university is currently under new leadership with interim President Saller, they waited, I believe, until Wednesday of that week to issue a statement, and one that was extraordinarily light-handed. And since then, Jewish community leaders and Jewish students have faced anti-Semitism on campus. Granted, it's not as bad as it has been on schools out east, like at the Columbia campus or at the Cornell campus. But the Jewish community at Stanford is an incredibly resilient one, but we feel alone in this. We feel that this is not the time for university administrations to start playing nonpartisan games. This is the wrong time for the university to start saying that they believe in academic freedom and that prohibits them from making a statement. I'm a huge defender of academic freedom. Last year in a school newspaper, I wrote an article defending 2 girls who were pictured reading Mein Kampf as a joke. I am a longtime defender of academic freedom. However, I think there's a large difference between allowing professors and allowing students to freely associate. I, for example, think that the bans of Students of Justice in Palestine from the Brandeis and Fordham campuses is wrong. However, I think that makes the Jews also look bad, like they need to silence their opponents to be successful. But I think that what we do need is moral leadership. And Senator, that's something that you have provided, and I hope your colleagues will continue to provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Smidman, I would first like to acknowledge how unacceptable it is that you faced acts of anti-Semitism on your own campus. Where obviously you should feel safe. I mean, that's inherent in the way our system works. And we must do everything in our power to ensure that the Jewish students and all students are always protected. In your view, what do you think is the most important thing that we can do right now to protect students on campus?
Thank you, Senator. Just to be clear, when you say we, do you mean federal government or university administration?
I think we as Americans, so you can say refer to the federal government, your administration.
So I think, as I'll echo what has been said already, that what must be done and should have been done right away, immediately, is to send a clear moral message, which did not I'm not saying it didn't happen across the country, but didn't happen in many places, especially on college campuses. Right, at Columbia, it took 3 weeks until they actually sent a message of moral clarity, right? And I think the other aspect that I touched on earlier is transparency and acting quickly upon anti-Semitic reports and on all hateful incidents that are reported. Right now, there is no transparency in regards to my specific incident. It's been 3 weeks, and there's still no information in regards to what's going on with the student. The university says the FERPA law, which my understanding is like the HIPAA for medical, so they can't tell me any information. But I specifically said I don't want to know the student's name. I just want to know that something's being done. So I think moral clarity needs to happen right away and immediately, and I think now there has to be transparency in regards to what actually is being done.
Great. I appreciate that. Thank you. I yield back to the chair.
Yes, it's on. Yeah. Been on many, many campuses over the years. I've seen all kind of hate. All kind of hate. Black, white Americans, Asian, Jewish. I've always had an opinion on that. You know, I dealt with a football team that had to bring everybody together to be successful. We don't have that same attitude in academics. We don't have that moral attitude. I don't understand why. I really don't. Best country to ever in this world. And we're a melting pot. We're a melting pot, everybody. It's hard, very hard, but we have a constitution, we go by it. And it's just unfortunate. Where do I see the problem? I'll tell you where the problem is at. We don't have any leadership on our college campuses. Now, we have some good professors, we have good deans, we have good presidents in some places. Most of them don't have the courage to stand up for their students, all students. I'm not talking about a few, I'm talking about all. When things might not be right with some, they need to stand up for the others when they know that they need protection. It's sad, it really is. I've talked to my presidents in my state after I was elected. I'm not going to put up with censorship on campus, abuse on campus. Not going to put up with it. I can't do a whole lot other than the fact that we do send some federal money to our universities. But until we get control of our leadership on campus, we have no chance whatsoever. Tenure has killed this country, and I'll tell you that. Tenure of people on campus that teach classes, knowing that they can't be fired, they can teach anything they want. It's wrong, absolutely wrong. I was fired as a football coach. Why? Because I didn't win games. Right now, a lot of our professors and deans across this country are losing because they have an ideology and they won't stand up for our Constitution. I just thought I'd say that, but it's just, we need to hold our college boards accountable, our presidents accountable, our deans accountable, and our professors accountable. Our students are vulnerable when they come to college. We all were. You're excited, you want to learn different things, and sometimes you get in a little bit of trouble. But you have to know right from wrong. We've ruined the nuclear family in this country. You know, over half the kids in this country have one or no parent. A lot of it starts at home. But we have to have something done on the secondary level and the higher education level. You know, one of my best friends is Bruce Pearl, Jewish basketball coach, one of the most successful basketball coaches ever. Huge American first, and he'll tell you that. And I'm going to read a statement. He just lost his first game of the night to Baylor, and he called me and says, and he does a lot of traveling, speaking about our country. And I want to read what he says. As a head coach of Auburn's men's basketball team, I've witnessed far too many acts of anti-Semitism, racism, and other discriminatory acts. We all have as coaches, because we've been around. We've seen young people all of our lives. However, I'm not delivering this message as Coach Bruce Pearl. This is coming from Bruce Pearl, proud American Jew, and a board member of the United States Israel Education Association. Through my work with USIEA, I have spoken at town halls, held seminars on Israel with populations from young adults to ministers, and even taken my team to the Holy Land. Last summer, through my efforts with Athletes for Israel, we took the University of Arizona, Kansas State to Israel and Abu Dhabi to support peace and prosperity in the Middle East through the Abraham Accords. College rhetoric is full of misinformation. Students need the facts and the history that underpins it. They need exposure to people from different backgrounds. They also need opportunities to come together to find common ground through prayer, spirituality, and honest dialogue. That is how we end this cycle of hate and eradicate genocide. The unwillingness of universities to publicly condemn Hamas for their genocide and hostage-taking breaks my heart. I come to you out of love for my country, love for my Jewish faith, and love for all of our college students. Please stand with me to defend all three from anti-Semitism and urge Congress and the Biden administration to enforce the protection of Jewish students and foster an environment for them to learn, grow, and thrive, and learn the truth. There needs to be a moral clarity here and no more calls for Israel and the Jewish people to be eliminated from river to sea. I'd like to thank the United States Congress for consistently and unequivocally and unconditionally standing with Israel and helping her fight for her ability to exist. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Casey.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. I want to thank every one of our witnesses for being here today and making the presentations you made, and those of us who are here and others who are not here, I'm sure would benefit as well from your written statements in addition to your testimony here today. But I wanted to direct my questions to both Ms. Steinberg and Mr. Schmidman because of your closeness to the issues we're discussing, because you're students. But I think, Ms. Steinberg, what you said earlier when you were asked by Senator Hickenlooper about what can be done, and I know Mr. Schmidman as well, you were asked a similar question throughout the course of the morning. You talked about that moral clarity that is essential here. And I think what was both striking and disturbing in the aftermath of October the 7th, hours, days later, even weeks later, is for some in America, lack of moral clarity on these issues, whether it was public officials or commentators or others. I mean, I don't know why someone would not make a statement initially, right out of the gate, that what Hamas did was engage in a terrorist act, and they are a terrorist organization. Why you couldn't, some couldn't say that, I'll never understand. But of course, what flowed from that was that horrific increase in anti-Semitism. I guess 388 was the percentage I saw from the FBI director. And we know that prior to October the 7th, in the United States of America, that number was escalating for 6, 7, 8 years, and then just took a dramatic rise after the 7th of October. So it wasn't as if we were making good progress in stamping out or purging the country from anti-Semitism before that, and now the job ahead of us is much bigger. But I think that moral clarity was missing. It's still missing in a number of college campuses at the leadership level and I think in our broader society. But here's the question, and I know this is by way of reiterations. I just want to, I know it's a little bit repetitive, but what would you hope that we would do? And the we means the United States Senate, the United States House of Representatives, the administration, both branches of government. What would you hope that we would do to at least provide a measure of, if not a measure of certainty that these incidents will never happen again, but at least be seen as being part of the remedy long term. And I realize public institutions, Congress, the White House, federal agencies, I realize that's not the whole answer, but what steps would you hope that we would take other than a reiteration of that moral clarity that anti-Semitism is a moral evil? So is Islamophobia, so is racism. We could add to that list. But other than that moral clarity by way of statements, what actions would you hope we would take?
I'll start. Thank you so much for the question, Senator Casey. Moral clarity is obviously very important, but there's a fine line between statements of moral clarity and issuing propaganda and forcing ideology into the throats of children at schools. That's the last thing I want, and I think the spread of the diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy is what led to the rise in anti-Semitism among young people in the first place. When everyone fits in a slot in a ladder of oppression, it makes sense that Jews, who are only 2% of America's population, but who are, I would say, hard workers, a culture that values knowledge, are overrepresented. That's seen not as a reflection of Jewish culture, but as a problem. I think that what can be done on a national level by the federal government, not relating to moral clarity, would be to ban TikTok, or at least to heavily regulate it. I'm in Generation Z, I'm 21 years old. Half of my peers use Gen Z as a search engine. How that works is very confusing to me, but that's the case. And I recently re-downloaded TikTok, I didn't have it, to see what people were saying, what videos are being shared. And there have been studies that have been shown that the videos that are being propagated on TikTok largely lean anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic. I opened up my phone, I searched in history on the TikTok app, and one of the first videos that came up was a video of a beautiful woman with a face filter that says, "Let's start in 1897. But Jewish history doesn't start in 1897. It started thousands of years ago. And Gen Z, our education system, and our attention spans because of social media make it so that TikTok is heroin. And I would encourage you to look into regulating it, if not banning it.
Oh, sure. Sorry. Maybe you could, if you want to submit something for the record, we could. If,
Yeah,
if you're out of time.
Oh,
okay.
Thank you, Senator Cassidy. My first question is for our two students, and it has to deal with the response of your university presidents. We're going to talk today about what the federal government should do, but I would contend that there's a responsibility by university presidents, the Board of Regents, whoever has authority and responsibility for these universities. And I want to compliment our former colleague and now President University of Florida, Ben Sass. This is what Senator Sass, now President Sass, said. But I also want to be clear about this. We will protect our Jewish students from violence, he wrote. If anti-Israel protests come, we will absolutely be ready to act if anyone dares to escalate beyond peaceful protest. Speech is protected, violence and vandalism are not. So for our two students, what has been the response by your university president and people in authority to say, yes, peaceful protests are allowed, but violence and threatening people is not? Ellie, would you go first, please?
Thank you, Senator. I guess what I would say is that prior to last week, specifically with Columbia, where they created this anti-Semitism task force and they released a much stronger message, we had 3 weeks of essentially silence, right? Whatever message they sent out was very light. They were constantly equivocating between suffering, but more or less silence between what was going on the ground by students. So specifically, let's talk about hate speech for a second.
Yeah, silence is very, very deafening at times. So there was minimal response.
Right.
But leadership could have made a difference and given you made you feel safer.
Yeah, and I think that enabled the hate speech, and which is what eventually led to actual physical violence.
Okay, Ms. Steinberg.
The lack of moral clarity that has come out of the Stanford administration has been appalling, especially when past presidential administrations at Stanford have been extremely quick to respond to geopolitical events as they emerge. I think that the Stanford interim president and provost are not pro-Hamas. I think they disagree with the protesters, and I think that the protesters should be able to protest. But I think that because the ideology of diversity, equity, and inclusion that does not include Jews, some of my other speakers up here can sort of elaborate more on that, how the diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaucracy that's supposed to protect minority students explicitly excludes Jews.
So the response from your administration has been lacking.
It's been deafening.
Been deafening, okay. But if it would have been some other group that they were acting against, based upon their sexual preferences, their sexual identity, people from Kansas were there, what would the administration have done?
I can talk about a few incidents at Stanford where we received emails after what could be construed as nooses were found. One of them was an abandoned tire swing. Another one, I believe, was the remnants of a Halloween or Christmas decoration. But after these were found, the university was very quick to issue statements about anti-racism and the importance of combating it actively. And that wasn't even when students were chanting for the genocide of 6 million Jews. The anecdote I gave earlier about a peer of mine at Stanford not knowing where Israel is, but chanting for its destruction, was not to say that she didn't know what was going on. And she doesn't, but she still knows enough to chant about Israel's destruction.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. As students, do you feel like that you have the ability to contact the Office of Civil Rights? Is there some type of a mass movement by Jewish students across the nation reaching out to the civil rights folks and saying, we've got a problem here?
I can say for Columbia, we have not done that. It might be to our fault, but we're not really knowledgeable about that, and we're unsure about the effectiveness of it.
Okay. I'm going to go to Mr. Marcus, I think, to start with. We didn't just wake up one day and we were here. Students just all of a sudden don't start hating Israel. They've been taught this, that there is something going on in our college campuses across the nation that set the stage for these type of riots to occur. What in the world is being taught at our universities to hate Israel? Where did this come from? I'm baffled. I'm stunned that this has occurred across the nation.
Senator Marshall, I couldn't agree more. This is not a situation in which we just wake up and it happens to be the fact that students are saying and doing what they're doing. It has taken many years and considerable fortune to get to this point. Start at the very beginning.
Fortune. Tell me about the fortune part of this, please.
Sure. Start with the faculty. It's not a matter of, does a professor have a particular view? It's a matter of, think about the departments of, let's say, engineering, chemistry, math, biology we could have had if we did not have to move slots into essentially identity politics positions. Oh, I see the water bottle gavel's coming down.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you all. And I'm going to ask my questioner to be brief because I'm going to hold myself to the same standard as I have. And there's some who have left, not because of lack of interest of my colleagues, but because they got other committee hearings to go to. Rabbi, we're not talking about microaggressions. I was struck that you said that your time at GW, you would go by and hear somebody doing something that you could have taken offense at, but that's free speech and you hung with it. This is something different. So just to be clear, this is not the so-called microaggressions. This is something which is far more, I hate to say the word offensive, toxic. Please.
So personally, I'm an anti-alarmist. I don't like the idea of scaring the kids that anti-Semitism is on the rise. My experience at GW has been that anti-Semitism was not on the rise. And that's ironic because GW has been in the news a lot the last couple years. We probably don't have time to go through each incident, but each incident we vigorously investigated, and in and of itself, I don't think there's evidence of anti-Semitism at GW. But the difference this time, I think, is that for the first time we expected that finally there would be more clarity, and there clearly isn't. So that's what's different now. We would expect that finally the world would rise up and say, we stand with the Jewish people under this unprecedented attack, and they didn't. Why didn't they? That's what we're trying to figure out.
So let me go there. By the way, Ms. Steinberg, if anybody wants a continued discussion of how this is not microaggression, this is something different, but microaggressions are prosecuted and this is not. I know that you write for the Free Press and they've done some really good stuff on that. So I read that, and just to say that is a really good discussion. You and Mr. Schmidman are clearly not shrinking violets. But Mr. Schmidman, if 100 faculty on the Columbia Law School get up and say that somehow this is to be condoned and even celebrated, 1,300 Jews being killed on a single day, babies being massacred, et cetera, does that kind of trickle down into the attitudes of your fellow law students and the attitude they must have to go along and get along sort of thing?
Without question. I think it shows them that they have support, that what they're saying is reasonable and appropriate, and it emboldens them to then do things in public.
So there's two things. One, it emboldens those who are leaning that way, and it kind of sends a message to those who might not, but nonetheless don't wish to put up with the hassle of being targeted by one of the 100 faculty.
Correct. And to add to that quickly, I have had students come to me privately and say how they're shocked and sorry about what's going on. But there's very few that are comfortable coming out publicly and doing that because of this.
Now, Mr. Marcus, both these two, everybody has made kind of a case that either in the DEI type curriculum that starts in public schools in California that begins to train people into oppressed or oppressor, or in the law school, which kind of finishes off that process. To what degree does the OCR, should that be looking at this kind of indoctrination which is occurring in K through 12? That sets the stage for college and post-graduate education.
Senator Cassidy, in DEI, we're seeing three kinds of problems. First, we're seeing a refusal to include Jews, Jewish identity, and anti-Semitism. Second, even where they include that, we're seeing research suggesting a very high incidence of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in DEI members, which suggests that the...
So that tells me that the DEI movement's been captured by ideologues who are not to the true spirit of what DEI is supposed to be, but rather using it as a vehicle for a certain agenda. Is that too broad of a statement?
It's not too broad, although there are aspects of the formal agenda that also have the sort of binary oppressor-oppressed opposition, which would create a problem even if you didn't have the first two problems. Now, you asked about, in particular, K-12. And I would tell you, even a few years ago, we would have said the significant problem for Jewish students in educational institutions is higher ed, but we can't say that anymore because we are seeing so many high schools where we're hearing from high school teachers, from high school students. We're hearing about students who are going through the hallways yelling death to the Jews. We're hearing about walkouts in favor of what Hamas is doing. We are getting reports from K-12 that dwarf anything we've...
I got 30 seconds. I'm going to stop you. In our coffee beforehand, Ms. Steinberg said, who's obviously a very intellectually curious person, did not know of the Office of Civil Rights of the Department of Education had the kind of responsibility to make sure that federally funded institutions protect kids from this sort of activity. How do we correct that? What recommendation would you have for us to demand of the OCR so that kids, not just the academically curious writing for the free press, but somebody else, that they know it as well as they know 911?
Students can come to BrandisCenter.com. We help them every day. But in terms of what OCR can do, it's not enough just to send out their links to their complaint form. They really need to find the problem, go out, don't wait for the students to come to
So
them.
read it in the paper, but it also seems like they should promulgate it more broadly. Like, you have to post it at your, your student union sort of thing. What would you think about that?
You know, I used to run an organization called the Office for Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, and their messaging was on banks around the country. It wouldn't hurt to have a little bit more in the way of communication of who they are elsewhere, but I really do think that OCR needs to be more proactive with their investigations as well.
I'll finish with that because I think that gives us something practical to take from this, aside from the kind of illumination that you've provided. Thank you all very much. I thank my colleagues. And by the way, anybody who wishes to submit a written statement, I think we're allowed to do that even though this is not a formal committee hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.